welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here, we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Intuitively Wild, the podcast. Today on the pod, we have a really special conversation. We are joined by Jaz Borri, and Jaz is an astrologer. She's a business mentor. She's a consultant. She's a guide. She's a content creator. She has several different businesses. She's an entrepreneur, and she's a multifaceted Gemini manifesting generator, 3/5, Scorpio rising, all the things that you could possibly have in your charts about transformation and growth and shedding and rebirth and doing things your own way, walking your own path. Many things that I am very familiar with. And Jaz is a very special person to me because for the first 6 or 7 months of this year, she was my business mentor. And we worked very closely together. And then that relationship transformed even more into her helping me with content creation. And all the magical images and visions that you see coming to life on my Instagram and website, she has created and co-collaborated with me on. And one reason I was so drawn to work with Jaz is because of her commitment to herself and her path. And I don't think I need to say too much because we really go into it in this conversation, but we talk about recovery and mental health in a way that I have yet to do so on this podcast. And I think it's a really important conversation. I think it's a really powerful conversation and gives you an idea of what recovery looks like. And Jaz is in recovery from workaholism. And we talk about what that means, what that looks like, and the reality of recovering in a world that praises workaholism and recovering from an eating disorder in a world that praises disordered eating behaviors. And I will give the trigger warning that we go into these topics and we touch on anxiety, depression, and the emotions and feelings and sensations that these experiences have brought up for us. But overall, I think that this is just a really powerful and insightful and important conversation for us all to be having with each other, and a new perspective maybe that is important for you to consider. I am so grateful to know Jaz and to work with Jaz and to be connected to her. And she has so many offerings, whether it's astrology or business or mental health, that she can support you with. And all of it will be linked below. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Jaz. Jaz, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. This feels so special because of our relationship and everything that we've been doing together. And I'm just pumped. I'm pumped to be in your world in this way.
Yeah, we recorded for your podcast. Was that last week already? That it feels like it was like yesterday, but it felt so special, and it feels so special to have you now here. Okay, so the first question I like to ask all my guests is, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
Oh, I should have prepared for this considering I listen to your podcast literally every week. Okay, so it's a hard question because I feel like I'm so open. A big part of my work is sharing the behind the scenes of my life. But I wish people knew that I'm a very loyal person. I wish people knew that from off the bat. As a Scorpio rising, I can come off a bit prickly and I can come off a bit intimidating. I've heard that. Like, I don't feel like that, but people have told me that. I think I'm such a good friend. I think I'm such a good partner. I think I'm such a good facilitator that I do wonder sometimes, like, oh, do people think that I think I have a higher perception of myself and I actually don't. And so I think that the reason I say that is, for me, that was some of the hardest stuff to really come to terms with, is that people usually misunderstand me off the bat. I think that's also very prevalent in like my 5 line in human design, is people can kind of pedestal you. And it sounds so weird when you're talking about it from yourself, because it's like you're tooting your own horn, but I don't mean it in that way. I just mean in like, people judge you. People look at you and they think that they know you. And I definitely feel a lot of the time like I'm a book being judged by its cover. And very rarely is that actually how I am. Very rarely do people perceive me as who I truly am. And that's like in good ways and bad ways. I remember when I was dating before I met my husband, my mum used to call it the Jasmine Jane effect, which was my stage name when I was a musician. She'd be like, they think that what they're going to get is this one thing. And then they actually get into the relationship and then they realize that it's a totally different game. And it's been a big journey for me to release the responsibility of having to get people to understand me straight away. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that was the first thing that came to my mind, of like, I just wish that people knew the inside of me right off the bat. It's just never the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you know that I feel very similar in certain ways to what you just said.
Yeah.
And also being a Scorpio rising, also having a 5th line in my profile in human design, I think we've had certain similar experiences. And sometimes I feel like the more I share online, the less I feel understood.
Me too.
And I can speak from experience knowing you that I guess you can come off intimidating at first, but getting to know you more and more, I feel like it's easier to see past the projection field, or so they say in human design.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's also interesting because when you're a Scorpio, it's also coming to terms with the fact that having more of an intimate circle of people, of friends, of family is actually way more aligned for you. And I think, growing up for me, that was really hard. I've never had the big friendship group, or if I did, we didn't all stay connected. I was always part of a bigger group, but I always had like that one friend. So if at school that one friend had a day off, even though I had 12 other girls to sit with, I still felt really lonely. I still felt like I was on my own that day.
Mm.
And it's just different. It's just a very non-conventional way that society poses to us anyway. It's very non-conventional in the way that you're supposed to have this outside affirmation that you're a good friend, or you're popular, or you're this, or you're that. And I think we're really letting go of this idea of having to be understood, and knowing that when I do get judged, it's funny because as Scorpio as well, most people won't actually confront you about it. They'll just bounce because they're too scared, which I'm like, that's fine. Good for you. I'm actually shaking in my boots over here and I don't really like confrontation. So if you don't want to confront me, I'm actually totally fine about it. I've had to learn to say to myself, if this person is judging me and having this like visceral reaction to this tiny little thing that I've said or whatever, you're pedestaling me and I can't do anything about that. So if you want to have a conversation, let's get into a conversation. Let's divulge. Let's do all the things. But if you're not going to initiate that, I'm not going to go there with you. And the same thing happens in a positive way too. Like, I'm always that person whenever I go to a party or a wedding or something like that. I just sit back and wait for some person to come to me, and then we end up talking the whole night and haven't even spoken to anybody. Haven't even hit the dance floor yet because I'm just sit in the corner with this person telling me about their childhood trauma. And I love it. I love it. It's so much, it's great. I love deep conversation. So for me, it's been really just surrendering what is my own stuff. And then I think as well, when that comes to business too, it's been such a mirror for that experience, because there are customers, there are people who follow you that you can get really agitated by your existence, your pure existence. And it's always a practice. It doesn't happen very often, I will say, but when it does, it affects me deeply. And I think that that's why I answered the question the way that I did. I just wish that people understood me a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I've had to really come to terms with the fact that most people initially are not going to understand me, at least not fully. And that's why it's so important to be connected to who you are and your intentions and your truth, and just grounding in the fact that if I am putting out into the world an energy that I feel good about and that feels authentic and feels intentional, then however anyone receives that is on them. Like, I can't control that. And I always have to come back to that, but it's very challenging.
That's Scorpio, baby. Like, Scorpio is a truth seeker. And no matter what, it will get into the grime and the dirt and the disgusting sewers for the truth. If you're going to do all that work for the truth, then you kind of have to. Not everybody wants to hear the truth. A lot of people do not want to do that. They want to live in the ignorance is bliss, and that's fine. That's their story. That's part of that Scorpio journey, especially when it's in your rising sign too. Like, something when it comes to perceptions, it's just so out of your hands in a lot of ways. It's how you're perceived. It's much more than that. Your rising sign is so much more than that. But a big part of it is how you're perceived. And you truly don't really have that much control over that, which Scorpios hate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, my Virgo self is like, I need to control how people see me.
Yeah. Yes.
But I think it's extra potent for both of us because we do live, to a lot of people, slightly unconventional lives, and embrace that. You even talk about unconventional success systems and unconventional ways that you embrace the world. And I would really love for you to talk a little bit more in depth about how you've embraced that and how you've come to that and what that life looks like for you.
Yeah. I think I've always been sort of obsessed with doing things differently. And I think it comes from being a really rebellious teenager, because as a child, I had a lot of routine. So, to give context, I grew up in the entertainment industry and I was working. I was in a musical. So, I was like homeschooled for that year whilst I worked. And then from there, I mean, the ball just kind of kept rolling, whether I was in commercials or shows or whatever it was. I was always working, every school holidays. I wasn't really going to people's birthday parties. I wasn't riding bikes. I wasn't jumping on trampolines, because if I hurt myself, I couldn't work and I had a contract to fulfill. So, having that be my childhood, going into teenage years, I mean, rebellion is going to happen to like 99% of teenage girls.
Mm.
But for me, it showed up not only as going out, drinking, smoking, sneaking out, doing all the things and doing so many things way earlier than what I definitely should have been, and putting myself in some pretty dangerous situations. But that didn't last very long, to be quite honest. I got sober when I was 20. So I think that also gives a little bit of context as to how hard I was going prior to that. But I just kind of got over it. I was like, I've tried all the drugs I want to try. I've drunk all the drinks I want to drink. I've had a lot of experiences. I didn't really feel I still need to live life. It was kind of weird now that I look back at it in my 30s, but that rebellion very quickly turned, and the whisper became a yell in my 20s of like, how do I do things differently? How do I live differently? The only thing I didn't want to be was ordinary. And there's this Avril Lavigne song called, oh my God, I'll find out what it's actually called. Well, the line is, I'd rather be anything but ordinary, please. I remember listening to that when I was like 10 and was like, that's me. I was so into it. So there's always been this sort of undercurrent of wanting to step outside the box, think outside the box. It's not to say that I didn't fall victim to being conventional. And I think that's actually what made me really start to obsess in my late 20s about unconventionality and unconventionalism and this whole concept in general. And how can we actually be successful by doing things differently? Because we're told that there's a certain way to do things. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. It doesn't matter how liberal your parents were. It doesn't matter what religion you did or did not follow. There's always a set of rules laid out for you, especially people of our generation. As we grow up and as we become parents, that we're going to be much more cognizant of that. But we're still going to have an idea of what we want for our children, right? We're still going to have an idea of like the best case scenario. And so I think that having these sort of rules, and it's not even rules, but a path sort of laid out for you of going, oh, this is what is right. I'm just always like, why though? I'm always questioning why? And does it actually have to be that way? Does it have to be this hard? Can it be easier? I think it also stems from the fact that I'm just a lazy bitch. Like, give me the bare minimum with the most incredible outcome. Like, I want to do minimal work for maximum output. I'm a very work smarter, not harder person. And I also noticed growing up that if I overthought something, so if I over practiced a routine or over prepared for a test or anything like that, I would fuck it up. The less I practiced, the more I just trusted myself, the more that I just lent into my talent and honestly just believed in myself and was like, bitch, you got this. People were enamored by whatever I put out, right? And so seeing that within myself, seeing that within my own success, even with my businesses, launching my astrology business back in 2020 and going full time as this like witchy, spiritual, therapeutic practitioner, leaving my corporate 9 to 5 job where I'm making, I don't know, like almost 200 grand a year with a car and all the perks thrown in, did not make sense. And yet it worked out. I did a lot of it my own way. I figured it out on my own. And I just kind of did what I thought was right. Some of it worked out, some of it didn't. That's totally fine. But it's always had my mind thinking, whenever I've done things that have been successful and I've actually induced the experience or the feeling of what I deem success is, I never copied somebody else's method, ever. Or like the quintessential one, the status quo of how you get from A to B. And so I was like, I think that there's something here. And I mean, that stemmed into my astrology practice and helping people figure out what their soul came here to be, and then the strategies that go along with that. My astrology readings have always been and still are incredibly pragmatic. That's something that I do differently than other astrologers. It's very, very grounded in reality and it's incredibly practical. Even that's again thinking outside the box. That's a non-traditional success system. Not only is it astrology, but it's pragmatic astrology. It's the antithesis of what this quote unquote mystical modality is shown to us as. And so I guess it really is this like deep-rooted, how do I say this without sounding like a bitch? But like it's this deep-rooted irreverence to the patriarchy, to the status quo, to anything that tells me that I have to be this and ordinary. And I just think if you do the ordinary thing, you're going to get ordinary results. And sometimes those results are great, but I would rather be living out of a cardboard box. That sounds so incredibly privileged, but I would rather be living out of a cardboard box and doing something that I don't want to do or that someone's told me to do. I lived a lot of my life doing that. And being on somebody else's time and somebody else's vision, not interested anymore. And I think that so many people, especially business owners, especially creative people, not only do they have to think outside the box in order to be successful, because that's what's actually going to get you there and, being different and all those things, but like that's actually how they want to live and want to work. But society tells us it's stupid and dumb. And it's just so not. because it's so worth feeling internally fulfilled and excited and joyful.
I mean, there's so much that you just said that I want to touch on. But for me, one thing that kept coming into my head is how deeply ingrained these quote unquote rules are, or these conditioned ways of being, that we don't even realize that we can question them and that we can do them differently. And when we start to question our beliefs and what we have previously deemed as just fact, that's when we can start to step outside the box and redefine things for us. Like you said, what does success mean to you? It might mean something completely different to you than your parents. And so therefore, the way to achieve your success is going to look completely different than how your parents are telling you to achieve success. And it takes a lot of courage and self-knowledge to say, no, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to define life on my own terms and create my own life in my own way. I think that's one reason why we work well together, because I also don't do well when someone tells me this is the way you need to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm also like, why? But that doesn't feel good to me. That doesn't feel right for me. And we've had this conversation before where I'm like, logically, I hear why that would make sense for my business, but I can't, my intuition's just saying no right now to that. And to have someone who I'm working with who respects that and listens to that and trusts that within me is so important to me.
I think it's so important to leave that space. And I find that the people who are drawn to me and that I like to work with the most are people who have gone through that first part already. They've realized that they don't want to live the way everyone else lives. They don't want to do business like anybody else. And they've maybe had help from other consultants and other people, but it's very much, you got to do it this way. Here's the 1, 2, 3. And they're like, that either didn't work for me or I didn't enjoy that kind of support. Whereas I am like, it's funny because I'm a consultant. So I am here to actually tell you what to do. I'm not just a coach where I'm a mirror and I'm reflecting back to you. That's a part of what I do, depending on how we work together. But from a business perspective, which is how we work together, my job is to tell you what to do. My job is to advise you. And that's a very specific and real distinction that I think a lot of people, a lot of mentors like that are in my position, they are like, well, if this client isn't doing what I tell them and then they don't get the results, then why are they complaining? They start to freak out about what that means about them as a consultant. I think because my worldview is just so opposite to that, that's not the only way. It's up to me as the mentor, having the knowledge and the wisdom to go, okay, well, how can we tweak this a little bit so we're still getting the essence of this concept coming through and strategy coming through, but how can we do it in a way that's different? How can we do it in a way that works for you? And so then I'm just throwing stuff out onto the table and going, well, how do you feel? I think also because of my occult and arcane and mystical knowledge, I integrate that a lot into my work. And so I know where to push you and where not, because I know where your alignment is. I have an idea of that, and I can put things out on the table that are going to be more aligned anyway. And then I can kind of, I mean, not only do I know you because I've been working with you, but it gives me this sort of edge of being able to be like, nah, like it's all good. I remember one of my past clients is a Pisces, triple water. And she did not want to put her face online at all, but she was a service provider. So I was like, babe, we've got to find a way to get your voice out there. How do you feel about voice? So she ended up doing, our strategy was LinkedIn, because it's a lot less forward facing. It's more like articles, blogs. It's more, a lot more writing, grounded in writing. Substack wasn't a thing then, or it was a thing, but not as much of a thing it is now. I can see now she's on Substack. She has a podcast. There's no video. She might pop her face on Instagram like once a month if we're lucky. She's killing it. She's doing great. I was never going to push her to do YouTube or anything like that. I just think it's really important. The actual person and their intuition and their greater desire for how they want to experience life is also accounted for and taken into consideration when they're running their business. I just think it's insane that 90% of mentors, business coaches, consultants aren't thinking about that. To me, I'm like, how could you not? But that's the reality, because they want to get results. And if you want results and you're very results driven, I'm probably not the consultant for you, because I'm not going to push you to do shit that you don't actually want to do, because what's the point?
Well, this really brings in one of the other key parts of your work that you talk about, one of your other themes, sustainable success. Because it's like quick results versus sustainable success. And I think you can only have sustainable success if you are taking a person first approach and an individual, unique, customized approach. Because I also am of the mind that there is no one size fits all when it comes to anything, especially strategy. And if you're completely taking the person out of account, then you're not actually helping them. You'll never help them get to where they want to go, at least not in a sustainable way. And you're also not empowering them to grow into the person that they're meant to be and the business person that they're meant to be. I really want to talk about how you discovered the importance of sustainable success and how you've defined that for yourself.
You want that story? Okay, let's get to that story.
Whatever you're comfortable sharing, mental health is something that's so important for both of us as well. And it's such a powerful story. And I would love to hear you share pieces of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important that I share this story, because it really does underpin a lot of the work that I do and the emotional why. Like, I even get a bit emotional just even thinking about it. So I've struggled with mental health my entire life. I was experiencing anxiety and severe anxiety attacks at 5, like as early as kindergarten, basically. And it's something that runs in my family. There's a lot of mental health stuff on my dad's side of the family. And so it's something I was always quite cognizant of. So I've been in therapy. I put myself in therapy when I was 17, on my spiritual shit. I'm taking care of myself. I'm journaling. All these things were things that I was doing quite naturally. I remember I actually found a journal for when I was like 15, and I was doing all this like manifesting stuff and writing down things. And I didn't even remember that I was into that stuff then, but I obviously was. And I think it's because I knew I needed to talk to my brain. But for me, I have suffered a lot of traumas in my life. I mean, firstly, growing up in the entertainment industry and working at such a young age, like that's not normal and it's not healthy. We've seen what happens on an even grander scale with child actors and all that sort of stuff. So obviously it's not that hectic for me, but I can definitely empathize for sure with those people. I can't even imagine what it would have been like on that level. And so there was that. My relationships throughout my late teens and early 20s were from like lightly toxic to just downright abusive. And so there was a lot of trauma that happened through that. And what I realized about 2 years ago, or maybe 4 years ago now, is that I was a workaholic. At the time, I didn't realize why, but I did have an understanding that I was a workaholic and that I used work to cope and numb from feelings, just general feelings. It also felt like if I wasn't working like I needed to work, I had that actual addictive feeling where it was almost like I couldn't relax. I literally didn't know how to do that. And what I've now come to understand is that that was my coping mechanism. I didn't drink, I didn't take drugs, I worked. And that stopped me from having to deal with any of the problems that I had internally and any of the traumas that I had experienced. So about 2 years ago, my business had one bad month. And when I say bad, it wasn't bad. But in my head, it was horrific. It was all over. Oh my God, this was all just a fluke. It's done. And that started I spiraled a little bit. And that was kind of like the first domino. From that point, I then worked even harder and for about 6 months. Then my Saturn return hit. I have a Saturn in Pisces at 0 degrees in the fourth house. So opposite my 10th house, which is all about career. I basically had a mental breakdown. I still tried to force myself through all of this. I had a team, I had all of the stuff. It wasn't until I found myself at the end of 2023. So the Saturn return started in March 2023. I found myself at the end of last year. I was actually looking at photos of myself and I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe I looked like that. I was experiencing what I could only describe as episodes, what I thought was severe panic attacks, where I was shaking, vomiting, like whole shebang. I was depressed. That was a new one. Anxiety, I knew I understood. I'd had these episodes before, but I had never been depressed. So that was really scary. Yeah, it was really, really scary. And I was just super unwell. I tried to take a sabbatical. I tried all of this stuff. Finally, I went because also I got married in March of this year. So I was gearing up for my wedding and all of this stuff. I was supposed to be the happiest I'd ever been. And I was mentally, physically, emotionally so unwell. I finally took myself to the doctor and she said, you're 100% severely anxious and depressed. So let's get you into some therapy. I was like, amazing. And I think I'm going to need medication because I had never been on medication before. It's something I always just really wanted to see if I could manage myself. And after my whole life, I'm like, bitch, I'm done. Like it's you tried that. It's time to try this new thing. So I started taking Lexapro and everything started to get better from there. I mean, it wasn't just Lexapro. I was in therapy every week. And just recently, I was finally have my diagnosis that I have CPTSD. So how this all works into sustainable success is I started to get obsessed with how do I make this sustainable when I got really, really sick. Because I was like, wait, I love working for myself. I cannot go back to working for someone else. That's going to make me more depressed. Like the fact that I worked for myself was like the one thing that I had left, for myself. And I just was like, I can't let this go. But I realized that if I was going to just maintain an online presence, not even sell anything, I was going to have to figure out a way to do it sustainably. Once I started talking about all of this stuff, people were like, yeah, wait, I'm actually really burnt out. Yeah, wait, this has been a really tough year. And I think that, the economy has been fucking crazy. Cost of living has been intense. Business owners are going through it. And it made me realize how important mental health is for founders. And this is why I still continue to do my therapeutic work. My therapeutic work is not the breadwinner of my business. I could probably stop doing it from a purely business perspective. It probably makes more sense. But to me, knowing that it's there, knowing that it's on the table, knowing that I'm able to integrate it anyway, but just knowing that people can come to me purely for that. And there is a place in the world for business owners, for founders, for women, for creatives, for anybody to just come and be seen and heard and held through this whole experience, and someone who gets it, not just from a skills and expertise perspective, but who truly gets it. I just think it's really important. So not only do I keep sustainable success at the forefront of any consulting that I do with founders and any of my mentees, it's part of the foundation of who I am, because I've experienced what it's like when you have success that is unsustainable. It is so heart-wrenching to have, and it sounds privileged and weird, but it is such a fucked up place to be when you are making great money, when you are on the outside killing it and meeting all these societal standards of success and maybe even your own version of success that you thought you wanted, but on the inside, you want to die. That is so dysregulating. It is so painful to be that. There is so much shame. There is so much guilt. There is so much in that. If I can stop people from getting there by focusing on sustainable success and making sure that if I'm consulting with you, that that's always going to be just held for you. You don't even have to worry about it. I'm never going to advise you into something that's unsustainable. And there's a place that you can come back to sustainability. There's a way that you can undo all this conditioning. There's a person who can help you still maintain your business and get better and feel good and get rid of all that fucking bullshit that you have to grind and you have to basically sell your soul in order to be successful. No, like that. I just think it's so important that there's a place for people to do that, that is held in really high regard when working with business owners, because at the end of the day, this is your life. And you can say that you want, it's your professional life versus your personal life. Okay, whatever. It's your life. It's your whole life. It's never worth it. You can be very driven and want success professionally, but I don't think I would strongly advise against doing it at the detriment of your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Because when you get there, it's not going to be sweet. You won't even be able to taste it.
I'm so grateful for you for sharing that story. Thank you. And honestly, it was one of the main reasons I decided to work with you, and not because we even really talk about my mental health or you help me with that aspect of my life that much, because we really don't, because I have, my own support system that was already in place, but because you get it. And of course, recovering from workaholism and recovering from an eating disorder are very different things. There are key points that you brought up in your story that are so similar to what I have experienced. And knowing that you understand that feeling and have had that experience, I think has laid a foundation of understanding between us that just supports everything else we do. And I am really so sick of people wearing their burnout like a badge of honor and talking about how much they're working. And when someone asks you how you're doing and you say busy, people saying, "Oh my God, that's so great." I hate it. And I think it really needs
Me
to
too.
change.
Me
And
too.
and this is coming from someone who, as you know, is so dedicated and devoted and has big dreams and works really hard and cares a lot and wants all the things. But I refuse to go out into the world and tell people about how much I'm working and how exhausted I am. I think it's an ego thing. I think it's a trauma thing. I think we really have to completely change the narrative and ask ourselves why we've attached to that as something positive.
You know what? It's so okay to have things on your plate. You best believe I have shit on my plate. Like I have 2.5 businesses. I have a new marriage that I'm in. I have a dog. We're trying to buy a house. I'm paying off debt. Like shit's going down. I mean, recovery, things are happening, right? But when people ask me like, how are you or how are things? I just say I'm vibing. I'm vibing. I'm doing all the things that I want to do. I'm doing all the things that bring me joy. And this year for me, I really centered creativity, stability, and connection. Those are my 3 words for the year. Whenever you're making decisions about what you want to do or, products that you want to put out, asking yourself, okay, well, is this going to bring more creativity, more stability, or more connection? And a lot of the ideas that I've had over this year, not really. Like there's a lot of things that I've had to sort of put on the back burner, a lot of things I've had to say no to, and a lot of ideas that I've got to say yes to as well. I haven't really sold anything at all, really. I mean, I've got astrology readings that come out once a quarter. My one-on-one books are always open. I'm building my new business, but as it pertains to offers, I'm not really churning anything new out. If anything, I've taken things away. My membership doesn't exist anymore. My mastermind doesn't exist anymore. Being put on the back burner because unless it's going to be a creative pursuit, which is buying a coloring in book for me or learning how to sew, or like those are the things that I'm saying yes to. Stability. At the moment, I've decided I'm not going to work with any coaches. I'm not going to upskill anything like that until my debt is paid off. That's me saying yes to stability and connection. This year, more than ever, have I hung out with friends and put my family and my time with my family first. And I had to do this because I didn't want to be here anymore. Like, it's serious. And so my businesses now are such a playground. They're such a beautiful place for me to express myself. And I'm rebuilding in this really new and intentional way. And I feel more solid. It doesn't feel frantic. It doesn't feel like I'm creating something that the archetype of who I am right now is going to love, but the next evolution probably isn't. I think I built a lot of my offers like that who I am right now in this moment is loving this. But if I evolve, which as a Scorpio rising, evolution is like a really big part of how I grow, and it's my superpower. It's changing and shifting and growing and evolving and transforming. And so I had to get rid of the box, the singular box that I was trying to fit myself into, and instead get a couple of boxes, create a couple of boxes, have me on the outside, evolving, shifting, changing, being able to input whatever I need into those boxes so everything's still organized, but knowing I probably am going to have to go get a whole new box. And so for me, that has been so freeing. And now what I'm building with the podcast and the subsequent business that's coming into that, the podcast is about to go through a name change and a shift because we've realized what that box is now. I have my new business, jbhaus, where I get to just like be the supporter, be in the background. I get to live my Banksy fantasy and just be like, here is the art. You don't need to know me. And then I have my personal brand where I get to be my Leo midheaven, Mars in Leo self. And I'm uploading YouTube videos of me yapping unedited every single day. And I'm shit posting on Instagram and just sharing the reality of what it's like to be like this, to be a creative, wacko, chaotic person, just who's not whole. I mean, I am whole, but I'm not unbroken. Still figuring my shit out. I just think it's so important. And it's been so much more fulfilling. And I feel like I finally, and it took me so long, oh my God, I had to undo so much conditioning. There was so much deconditioning that I've done over the last 2 years, really, if I'm honest. But I feel like I'm finally at this place. And what's really beautiful is I'm in no rush to evolve. I'm in no rush to get to the next phase. If anything, I'm like, let me just stay here. I really like it. It's really nice. Let me just be here earning just enough money to get by. I'm not looking to fucking smash glass ceilings right now. I'm looking to vibe and be and chill, have fun and make cool shit and be myself and learn some stuff and hang out with my friends. That's the era I'm in right now. And I feel like building all of the businesses on top of that is what is going to make it sustainable for me.
When you said I'm whole, but I'm not unbroken, I mean, that really hit me to my core because I feel very similarly. And I think it's our experience is what we've come from and those quote unquote rock bottom moments that allow us to now create the life we want to live and now have this knowledge of how we want to feel and how we want our life to feel because we know where we don't want to go back to. And I'll speak for myself. It can be tempting to be like, oh, but my eating disorder gave me so much. Or it can be tempting to want to go back to that way of life.
Oh, yeah.
And then I can remind myself, I know how that felt. I know where that will get me. And it's very similar for when it comes to me for overworking, I'll say, because it's that perfectionism, it's that control. The two are very intertwined for me. And so I have to catch myself with that too and say, I know where this will lead me. I know how this will cause me to feel. And ultimately, the answer is no. Ultimately, I've decided that I want to be happy and I'm going to find my way to success. And maybe that looks like saying no to a job opportunity or taking an hour off of work and journaling instead of pushing myself that bit further. And maybe no one else will understand that or it won't meet expectations, but to my core, I'll know it will be right for me and ultimately will lead me to exactly where I want to go. And again, big dreams, big goals, and the willpower to get there.
Let me get one thing straight. I every day come up against that version of myself. Every day I wake up and think to myself, oh, I should really go hard today. I should really look at that offer that I want to put out next year because next year is going to be different, right? It's going to be different. I'm going to be able to get back on my shit and I'm going to be able to work harder again and I'll be better then. And so I should really work on that and get ahead because that's more sustainable, right? That's more sustainable if I'm more organized and because, I should be contributing more. I should be contributing more to the finances. I'm being a burden on my husband. This is too much. You really should get your shit together. And then there's that little whisper. It only ends up being a whisper when you're in that cycle, in that spiral of, yeah, but that's not what this is about. Like that doesn't work for you anymore. And this is something that my therapist has given me and says to me all the time. She's like, you're doing big healing. Not only are you literally healing and finding ways to detach and dissolve your CPTSD, on top of that, you are looking to live a whole different life than what you have lived for the last 30 years. She's like, this didn't start happening to you in your 20s. Like, this isn't even just a decade. This is since you were so little, it is so deep in your specific subconscious. So you're doing big healing. This is probably going to take the rest of your life to remind yourself of that. And there's that part of me that is like, oh my God, I just want this to be over. Every session I have with her, I'm like, come on, surely this is enough. And she's like, that's the workaholism. That's the addict. That's the disease, whether it's mental illness, that's the disease within you wanting to pull you back. And then it's remembering that your people, and this was something that my husband said to me that really actually put me into therapy and got me on this path because I hid how I got myself into some pretty big debt and I didn't tell him because I was so ashamed. I didn't want to not be the breadwinner. I did not want to be. That's how I protected myself in my abusive relationship is I was the breadwinner. And so it was the only thing I had that kept me available to leave. So I didn't tell him for a really long time. And I said to him, it all came out. And he was actually the person who told me to originally go on my sabbatical. He's like, I think you need to take some time off. And my first thought was, why would he want to marry me if I'm not financially contributing? And in that moment, I knew that was a fucked up thought. So I told him about it. And he said to me, if you think that I want to marry you because of how much money you earn, then you shouldn't marry me because that's not why I want to marry you. My friends aren't friends with me because I can pay for lunch and I can take them out and I could take them on a holiday and I could do all these things for them. They just want to hang out with me. And if I'm not well enough to engage with them, then that's when my friendships, that's when my marriage, that's when it all goes to shit. The workaholism is such a sneaky one. So many people are probably addicted to work and using it as a coping mechanism to numb and to not deal with their stuff. And it's so socially acceptable, even more than socially acceptable, it's praised because we live in a capitalist patriarchal society. That is the only reason it is praised. Otherwise, it would be all the women being praised for birthing the children and nurturing the earth. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what it would be if it was a matriarchy. I mean, putting that very simply, but you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's your disordered self or your addict self. It's there every single day, but it's about And that's why I love that I have these three words to go back to. I have a vision of my 40-year-old self that I am like, hang on a second. Does she live like that? No, she doesn't. And you know what the other cool thing is, to kind of lighten this up a little bit? Business has become so much fucking easier. Like once I'm like locked back in a little bit, it's all over for you, hoes. Like now that I'm on this energy, bro, shit is so easy to me now because I'm just vibing, I'm having fun. Yeah, things aren't like flowing in, the tap isn't all the way on. But I also know that God, universe is like, that's not what this is about. Because I committed to healing. I committed to sustainable success. I committed to unconventionality. I committed to that way of being. And truly, if I want to be extraordinary, isn't that going against the grain? And isn't the grain patriarchy and hustle and all that sort of shit? But it's like, you decided, bitch, so we're not going to give you 800 people in the new offer. We're not even going to give you the offer idea yet because you're in foundation, because now you're doing what you need to do. I do feel very spiritually supported right now. And it doesn't mean I'm always happy. Sometimes I'm like, bitch, come on. I've been doing my work. Where's my prize? You know? But I'm also like, I'm not ready to receive it yet. And I'm just so down for the ride.
Yeah. And hearing you talk about, again, it's so similar to experiences I've had with my recovery, because eating disorders are also very sneaky and also very rooted in the patriarchy, and also can be very celebrated and very rewarded. And it's, you know, ebbs and flows. It's gotten easier over time. I'm very grateful for where I'm at in my recovery, but it's something I commit to every single day. And it's something that is on my mind every single day. And I don't think that that is something people realize if they haven't had an experience with their mental health in this way, is the toll it takes to stay committed to your recovery. I have to remind myself sometimes of like, think of where you were even this time last year, but especially a couple of years ago. If I have a day where all I can do is soothe my anxiety and keep myself grounded and keep myself on track, that's sustainable success. That is it. That's the work.
Yeah.
Eventually, like you said, that having this self-awareness, this self-knowledge, doing this work is what's going to lead us to where we want to go. And I think the people who haven't had, I'll say, the privilege of having these same experiences, I believe will have it in one way or another, or are just living a life that is one box. And maybe that's fine for them. But for someone who wakes up panicked at the idea of being average, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. You know, one thing that, I mean, I just agree with everything you've just said. And one thing that I'm really stepping into in my recovery at the moment is the letting go piece of like, that's who I was and that's not who I am anymore. And there's a little bit of grieving that kind of comes with that. That part of you, that addict, I say that addict in me doesn't want to go away. It was there to protect me. It doesn't think that it's evil. A big part of that is also acceptance. And so now that I have this diagnosis, I'm like, oh, it's funny because you have to accept that part of yourself, but also not let it rule you. But then I'm also thinking, like, is it not letting it rule me? Is that actually just patriarchal of like, don't let it hold you down? You can do anything. You better go. You better move. You better, you know, fuck that PTSD. Like, you can just, and then I'm like, hang on, that doesn't sound feminine to me in any way, shape, or form. That sounds like pushing. That sounds like revenge. That sounds, it's that more masculine feeling. And I don't know, maybe at one point I'll get there, but I'm not at that point yet. There's almost an acceptance of going, well, you're someone who lives with CPTSD. I'm also somebody who, I live with chronic pain. So I have arthritis. Maybe I actually can't work for somebody. Maybe that's actually not something that is viable for me, because if I'm honest, I don't think I would do very well. I never have done very well mentally, having to be somewhere at a certain time and not having that space of, if I have an episode, my therapist has said to me, like, you are going to live with this for the rest of your life. Like there is an acceptance of that and it will never go away. You'll learn how to manage it, but it is naive to think that it's never going to get triggered again. So if I'm triggered, I need to do what I need to do in order to survive. And so that acceptance of going, actually, I now have this thing that isn't my fault and I live with it. And so working 50 hours a week is not something that I can do anymore. Like if I was to lose a limb, I probably couldn't do certain jobs because it's just not going to be feasible. It's just not going to be realistic. It's just the way that it is. There's an acceptance. It's not to say you could never do that. If you didn't want to, you can always do what you want, but there has to be an acceptance first of, okay, well, if that's the life that I want to live, it's going to be way harder for me. So do I want to do that to myself? I really want it that bad. Most of the time, it's a no. So been reckoning with that. And that is such a huge shift. And that is letting go of who I was, accepting who I am now. And then I can make big moves. Then I can make big strides. Then I can go against, then the extraordinary starts to actually come in. But you have to sort of accept your shortcomings as part of who you are. And then you cannot let it define you. It's kind of meta, but that's what I'm sort of dealing with now in recovery is how do I let go, but also own this part of me, but not let it define me, but also like, it's okay if it does, you know, because there's the acceptance piece. It's a very like, it's such a head fuck for me right now.
No, I had that same experience. And
what's it like on the other side?
it's so I think labels can be tricky, but getting my diagnosis of having an eating disorder and accepting that label was really helpful and healthy for me because it helped me accept what I was going through. It helped me understand it. It helped me have words for it and clarity around it and recover from it and own it. And at the same time, I had to get to a place of, okay, now I have to step outside of that because being like, oh, I have an eating disorder or I had an eating disorder, I'm in recovery for an eating disorder. Each phase of that, it can still give the eating disorder power over me and keep me stuck in that. And this is where intention and intuition comes in because I have to be like, what is my intention behind this action? Is it actually moving me towards my goals and my dreams and my desires and recovery and my happiness? Or is there something sneaky working its way in there? And really have to check in with yourself through each process and be really honest with yourself, which can be hard at times. But I think the honesty is the most important step and the first step because just saying it can come before taking action on it or making a change or even accepting it, but just being honest about it and declaring it, even if it's just to yourself, that's the first step and what can lead you to then making the change. But it's challenging. You have to be ready to let go of the safety net that your diagnosis gave you and be willing and ready to create a life for yourself in recovery versus I think there's different phases of recovery and saying I'm now in this certain phase of recovery where I know it's still a huge part of my life, but my whole life isn't focused around recovery. And I can kind of define now what my life is going to look like stabilized versus needing that label to give me an excuse for why I need to do what I need to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, and again, it brings it back to stigma and patriarchy of if you have an eating disorder, if you have a mental health thing, it's a sign of weakness. And if we sort of neutralize recovery or being in recovery for something, whatever your thing is, right? If we neutralize the meaning of what it means about you, then you can act for it and protect it and feed it in a positive way, like nurture it from a place of love rather than from a place of fear, resentment. Like all of that shit is just, it's all just bullshit. Because we all know that these things don't make you weak. We're living in 2024. Like we've heard all these things and we sort of know that consciously. But because we have grown up in and been a part of such a patriarchal capitalistic society, that there's always going to be that part of your brain. I'm realizing now through your answer, it's like, how do we neutralize our perception of it? And then we can start to make decisions like, okay, I'm not going to go and work for somebody else. I'm not at that point in my recovery. Maybe one day my CPTSD is not going to be the thing that stops me from working. I'll be able to work. I'll be able to take any job that I want. I'll be able to take up any opportunity because would have been recovered enough or further along in my recovery for that to not be my reality. And maybe that's a goal that I have. But if I'm coming at it lovingly, then I'm not trying to work in spite of it. I'm coming at it of, okay, well, maybe could we even go as far as, can this leverage my work? You know, like, God, that's a big concept to even think about as well. I don't think I'm there yet, but we can make the decisions of, is this going to trigger me? Am I resourced enough to deal with the triggers of having to be somewhere at a certain time or having a trigger out in public? I'm definitely not. I want to get to that point and I can get there. And also the other question is, what's your support system? If you have any sort of like mental health stuff, which, let's be honest, we all have something of a varying degree. I just don't think that you can live without support. It's like, let's be honest, where are you at in your recovery of whatever thing that you're trying not to, again, define you, but also you have to acknowledge that you have it and protect it and nurture it and do what you need to do to not let it rule your life.
Yeah. And I honestly am at a place where I can say my recovery, my journey with my eating disorder and my anxiety and my mental health in general is part of what makes me so good at what I do and part of what makes me so proud of who I am as a person and what allows me to interact with the world in the way that I am. Yes, I can get overwhelmed by my anxiety or my eating disorder, or it can still hinder me, but I see it as a leg up. It's allowed me to see the world in a way that I want to see it and have a whole different perspective on life. And I'm very grateful for that.
I feel you too. And even as I hear you speak, I'm like, yeah, there are parts of it. Like the other day I had a trigger and I had to move a session. And because now that I've got the diagnosis, there's things that my therapist kind of wants me to put in place because we're really looking at what are my specific tools. And a part of that is not writing off the whole day, but checking in and using time. And I just said to her, look, can I get back to you in an hour? I've had a trigger. I would love to keep our session. I don't want to cancel it yet. I'd like to let you know kind of at the last minute. Is 30 minutes prior to our session okay to let you know this is what's happened? And I probably didn't need to like over explain myself, but it felt like a good exercise for me. And when I said that to her, she was like, absolutely. I'm so inspired by the fact that, because she's a practitioner as well, she's like, I'm so inspired by how you held this conversation. And I'm working with her purely in a therapeutic sense. We're not consulting. So I'm purely like a practitioner. I'm there to hold her. So it felt unconventional to do that. You're not supposed to do that, right? And turns out she felt so much more supported, connected, led, held by me sharing that. And she was like, I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story and your recovery and you're open about it. So there are those things where I'm like, oh, that actually is a bit like, if I didn't have this, then I wouldn't have been able to share that lesson and that wisdom. And now she has that wisdom. So yeah, it is kind of a leg up. So it doesn't mean these things aren't scary, but again, it's like, how can I have a sustainable business if I don't do that? How can I live and truly be doing shit my own way if I say no to that intuitive feeling of like, no, this is what I need to do and this is what I'm going through. Like, I have to follow that. How do I actually embody all of the things that I say I want to be and I fancy myself to be already if I don't actually do it? And I'm not also actively looking for new ways, having some kind of mental health thing going on. You do have to think outside the box. That's why I think that the people that are drawn to my work are people are a little doodle, like in the most loving way. Like we're just a bunch of fucking weirdo wackos, creative people, witchy folk who have been through some shit You're rebellious, generally rebellious and irreverent. And that's because you've been through some shit, you've seen some shit. And you're
Well,
like, nah, I've got to do this way.
yeah, because ultimately, I think that that's what it forces you to do when you've gone through these kinds of experiences. It forces you to be like, okay, who actually am I? What do I actually want? How
Mm-hmm.
do I actually support myself? It forces you to connect to yourself and know yourself. That is how you carve your own path and make life your own. I feel like we could talk about this all day. I have so many more questions I wanted to ask you, and just this conversation I could go on about for hours more. But for the sake of time, I want to just touch on intuition and how your intuition speaks to you.
Intuition speaks to me through my body a lot. And for a long time, I thought that that was scary. I think it's because I don't drink at all. And I haven't drank for a really long time. And I've been through quite traumatic experiences whilst sober. I didn't really have any of those sort of things. I mean, the worst thing I do is like, I mean, I used to smoke cigarettes and now I occasionally hit a vape. That's about as hectic as it gets for me. So I feel more connected to my body than sometimes I would like. Sometimes I'm like, can't there be some other way that you communicate with me rather than giving me back pain or this cramping in my stomach or this really deep heaviness in my chest? My body screams at me when my intuition is not being listened to. I'm claircognizant and a little bit clairaudient. The clairaudience only ever comes through when shit is fucking like I'm not listening. I had a clairaudience get me out of my last relationship by alerting me to the fact that Dan was ready. The voice said, your person is ready for you now. And I was in a relationship with somebody else.
Hmm.
I remember that moment as clear as day. I see those as my intuition, as my higher self. Because when I think about intuition, I think it's my future self, maybe in some other timeline. I think it's a combination of that with God, universe, and just my higher self in general, and also my past self and my present self. I feel like it's this whole kind of them all working together. So it does come through in sort of these knowings. It comes through for me in my body. So yin yoga has been really great for me to get more in contact with those parts of myself because you're really focusing on those uncomfortable feelings. I'm excited for when those feelings are positive and not just painful or whatnot. I think the more I work with this, that pain is going to dissolve and I might get some new indicators, which will be really exciting. But I do this practice that I actually learned from Shaman Durek. He has this practice in his book where you ask your body to tell you your yes and no signals. So I know a no for me is a heaviness in my feet, and a yes for me is like a tingle in my right ear. So there's little things like that. If I feel sort of disconnected from my intuition, I'll go into my wardrobe and be like, what should I wear today? And then I'll hold a piece of clothing and ask for the signal and see what happens. Those little things like that. It's very physical for me and a little bit witchy too with the Claire insert sense at the end. So yeah, it's very sensory for me. That's what I will say.
Okay. There's so much I want to say, but I know we're short on time. Okay. Living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self, no matter what. And I feel like this has been interwoven throughout our whole conversation, but how do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
I think I'm finally learning how to. Finally learning how to. I've had moments in my life where I've lived intuitively. I've had moments in my life where I've just lived wildly, and integrating those two things together has been a very new experience, but such a delightful one. And I think you coming into my work and coming just generally into my life and the work that you do was such a beautiful experience to have as I've been going through this recovery, as I've been going through this part of my life, and having these themes happen just generally in my life. I've learned so much from Intuitively Wild already. And I mean, I'm your mentor. Like, it's great. I love when that happens in the exchange. And I find that my work usually does that. There's always a mirror. But for me, living intuitively wild at the moment has come down to centering creativity in my life because creativity comes from intuition. Intuition is such a big part of creativity and creating something from scratch. And you also have to leave a little bit of room for the wild. to let it become what it's meant to be. Creativity has always been that thing for me, whether that was singing or dancing or writing songs or reading astrology charts or getting on sales calls and writing sales copy or creating content. Like creativity has been such a constant in my life. And when I think about the times where my intuition is so on, but so wild and untethered and unbound, it's when I'm being creative. And at the end of the day, that's all I am, is I'm just some creative witch that's seen some shit. That's it. That's all I am, you know? So I would say, yeah, creativity has been such a massive part for me.
I really love that you highlighted that as your answer, because the past 6 months that we've worked together, my creativity has been at its peak, the highest it's been since I was a very young kid.
Good.
And re-embracing my creativity and the fact that I am a creative person has helped me live more wildly and helped me embrace and embody living intuitively wild myself. And I remember one time you said to me, you're a very creative person. I was like, oh my God, I am a creative person.
Yeah.
That wasn't an identity that I associated myself with. And through our work together and just my growth and my own healing, I have embraced the fact that I am a creative person and I am a creative, and that's how I live my life. And that's been different for me.
I'm so glad to hear that, because the little girl in me who just wanted to be a famous rock star, and that was the archetype that I thought creativity could live through. Like I knew I could like sing or whatever. So I was like, oh yeah, that's the way I'm going to embody creativity. I originally started my online businesses, and not even online businesses, just in general, even when I was doing music as like my main beat, I just wanted to inspire people. I always wanted to play shows so that I could like alchemize the energy in the room and they could feel seen in the stories that I was telling, and they could dance and move that trauma. That's what I was doing. That's what I was inspiring them to do. And I didn't care if like no one's even there or whether we're playing to a packed house. That inspiration of allowing people to live intuitively wild and just express themselves and heal and be creative and see the parts of themselves that they were missing, and fall in love with themselves again by letting go of any notions that they had previously. That's something that's always driven me in my life. And that's the underpin of the underpin of the underpin of like, I just want to inspire people. And that's all I want. If I can inspire you to be more creative, if you've told me that you've been more creative and embodied and been inspired to bring that on as a part of your identity, because you are very creative and you have such a good creative eye. I mean, I tell you all the time, I'm like, you're fucking brilliant. Like, you're very, very good at what you do. That's just like music to my ears. That's everything. I don't care how many products you sell. I don't care about any of that. I mean, I do, but you know what I mean? That to me, that's real human shit. And that's where the sales are going to come from. That's where all of that is going to come from. Because I think creativity is just so important for everyone to experience in their own way.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just so grateful for your support, for you being one of the support systems in my life in all the different capacities that you are, and to know you, to connect with you, to work with you. Thank you so much for being here. And our Virgo, Gemini, defined throat selves could talk forever. But I think that this was such a powerful conversation, and I'm really honored to have shared it with you.
My pleasure, babe. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.